Hi, my name is LDibble, and this is my philosophy of education. I apologize, I'm going to rip through this as fast as I can because time is going to be tight. But basically, my background is I have worked for 20 plus years in the world of screenwriting and TV writing, video game writing. And in addition to doing all that writing, I was also teaching for a little over 10 years screenwriting and producing classes at the college level. So teaching wise, my background is in teaching college kids, almost all of whom want to be there. And with a couple of exceptions, most of my classes were creative writing workshops, which are obviously very dependent on the students bringing in the work that we would discuss. So the teacher I was very much a facilitator or a mentor in that situation. But I did go to school for English, and I want to teach English at the high school level. And I have a kind of a guilty confession to make is that, if I were a student, my ideal scenario would be the perennialism model. Basically soaking up the humanities. I have this, kind of fantasy of going to Oxford, sitting at the feet of a professor who looks like Sir John Gielgud or something, and just soaking up the Socratic dialogue about the great works, and being in a room full of people who, understand every obscure reference you want to make. I just think that would be great. But I also recognize that I am weird, and I don't actually think such a narrow approach would be great for most kids. Ultimately, I don't think that this is probably the complete education that students need to live in contemporary society. So my philosophy of education, looking at the 4 philosophies from the book, I would say that I'm probably most drawn to essentialism. I'm a very pragmatic, practical person, so the subject-centered approach really appeals to me. I think the primary purpose of education is usefulness, to prepare students for having a productive life and to be able to participate meaningfully in society. So if a student wants to study further in college, then high school needs to prepare them fully for college. If they want to enter a trade, then high school should be preparing them for that, as well as kind of giving them some of those most basic skills. My favorite quote from the textbook was from Virginia Gildersleeve, which is an awesome name. But the ability to think straight, some knowledge of the past, some vision of the future, some skill to do a useful service, some urge to fit that service into the well-being of the community, these are the most vital things education must try to produce. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. But breaking that down a bit, I have my break dancer there, so you can see I'm breaking it down. Knowledge of the past, basically, ability to think straight. We're going to learn the basics of English, right? Reading, writing, and listening, and especially master critical thinking. I really think part of the challenge of society today is there's not enough people who are capable of critical thinking. They just accept things at the surface and they don't dive any deeper. Knowledge of the past. That is about studying the classics, but not necessarily just the white European past. We should be pulling in all cultures, all of the world's wisdom traditions. A vision of the future. So that means reading contemporary works as well as contemplating current dilemmas and thinking about things that really matter in our everyday lives that can be, applied today. Useful skills. So that means being pragmatic and helpful. For English, that often means being able to read, being able to write, being able to speak and articulate your thoughts. College professors are complaining, even Ivy League college professors are complaining that students don't know how to finish a book. That's a problem. That's something that high school should have prepared them for. All of their schooling has prepared them for. So that's kind of what I even if they're not going to college, though, they should be able to speak clearly and articulate, and writing skills are really useful in every job. Some urge to serve the community. Ideally, students should understand that they're not living in a bubble. It's that kind of sense of being connected and caring about the people around you, I think is really something that we need. That maybe because of social media or whatever, we've lost a bit. We've lost that sense of connection. And so the more that you can kind of build a sense that, hey, you're not just going through this life on your own. You're connected to other people, and their success buoys you, and what you do and your talents and stuff can be put towards helping them as well. And that leads to a more meaningful life as well. So I really believe in that essentialism, but also I would say kind of with a sprinkling of progressivism. So if you think of my education philosophy as a cupcake, the meat of it is essentialism, but the frosting is progressivism. So with some essentialism, they think, we should just get back to basics. Well, I don't think that's necessarily true. The basics are very important, but students must have some freedom to pursue their passions and their talents in classes that appeal to that more creative side of them. So electives like music and art and sports and drama and creative writing. Obviously, I come from a creative writing and a film background, so that's really important to me. I have a kid who goes to art. That is the class that, she loves the most and that fires her up. And I do think we should still be encouraging kids to follow those passions if they want to after high school. Not everybody needs to be having the high-powered job that brings in a ton of money. These are the types of jobs that are really so important to our culture, to our discourse. Where would we be without the artists? And then the other thing about progressivism I just want to say is that working in groups is obviously a very essential skill that students should know. So just from a pragmatic point of view, that's something they should know so that they can take it into their lives, into their future jobs. In my philosophy of education, the role of the teacher and the student, so the teacher is an expert in their field and they're imparting that knowledge. In fact, they're kind of the first expert that they will encounter. People are only going to get more and more expert from here on. So there is a core knowledge that students should walk out with and that teachers are responsible for imparting. But there's also a lot of choices in how they impart that knowledge, and hopefully can make choices that are sparking the students' interest and getting them excited about the material. I do think if, the ideal scenario is that you actually get the student on board with discovering stuff themselves, and that is often the best teacher, which is taken from progressivism and romanticism. The students ideally should be active learners. They should be able to work individually as well as in groups. And hopefully they are curious and open-minded as well as self-motivated. Teaching methods and curriculum, coming from a creative writing workshop background, I really believe in creating an accepting, warm environment where nobody feels judged. Everybody feels like they can present their work without judgment. I do think it's important to kind of vary up the curriculum with a mixture of, old and new, poetry and prose, meaning like poetry is everything that's creative, and prose is everything that's like kind of expository writing, from all different cultures. Vary up the sort of assignments you're doing, vary up the way you're teaching it. Keep it exciting. Ideally, as a teacher, I would love to teach multiple types of classes, just to keep myself from getting bored. When I taught at the college level, I was usually teaching 4 or 5 different classes a semester, and I found that really fulfilling. Of course, that's not something I might have control over, but ultimately as a teacher, you need to be also very flexible and judge in the moment whether something's working or not, and be willing to change things up, and as well as to encourage creativity and not be super rigid all the time in, this is how it has to be. In conclusion, I think one of the most important qualities that a teacher can have is a revision mindset, meaning you are a work in progress and you can always be better. And so every single time you teach a lesson, every time you teach a class, you're judging what's working, what's not working, and how can I make modifications next time? How can I refine it, revise it, throw it out altogether and start over from scratch sometimes until you're kind of making it better and better. And I realize it doesn't work, but I put in a clip here of Paul Simon singing one of my favorite songs, Rewrite, which I highly recommend you go and listen to. You can find it on YouTube if you type in Paul Simon, Rewrite. And that is it.